Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Idea to Value podcast. I'm your host, Nick Skillicorn, and I'm thrilled to have with me today Michael Lee. Michael is the Senior Vice President of Strategy at Innovation Minds, and more exciting for me, he's also the only internationally certified Master of Creativity and Innovation Coaching in the entire world. So I'm sure we'll have quite a lot to talk about there. Michael, it's wonderful having you here today.
Thanks, Nick. It's really an honor to be on your show. I've been following you for a long time, so I'm really excited.
Welcome to the Idea to Value podcast, where in every episode we highlight the latest insights into creativity and innovation from experts around the world. I'm your host, Nick Skillicorn. I care about the evidence behind what makes ideas happen, and I've already helped thousands of people just like you through my unique insights into recent scientific findings of how creativity works. I also show you how to turbocharge innovation programs so they finally deliver on the value and ideas you've been struggling to execute. Get your free training on how creativity can be improved by registering now at www.ideatovalue.com. Now let's get on with today's episode. So, Michael, for people who don't know about you and your work, could you just give them a very brief background as to where you got started and how you got to where you are now?
Okay, sure. Let me put it this way. I spent most of my adult life as a filmmaker, factual filmmaking, which means documentaries, reality TV, and so on. Along the way, I started teaching as well. And about 10 years ago, I started teaching creativity as a specific discipline in a film school that I started. And over the past 10, 11 years, I had some things happen with reality TV that became quite, let me say, difficult or threatening, and decided that I would rather spend more time writing and teaching and training and coaching. And so I started focusing on the creativity work that I had started with the school. And I've developed a system which I call innovating, which is really based on studying everybody else's systems and the way that the mind works creatively, and coming up with a way to very quickly reinstate, relatively quickly, let's say, reinstate the native creativity we're born with, and get rid of the blocks that we have put in the way. Right now I have 3 lives. I still am working on film, but drama rather than factual filmmaking, which is really a stressful field for anybody who's doing that. Kudos to all of you. And I'm also doing my creativity coaching and training coaches. And then thirdly, I am working, as you said, for Innovation Minds as the Senior Vice President for Strategy and Marketing. And it's a very interesting Silicon Valley startup which combines innovation with employee experience and working on creating a virtual hybrid workplace where people can experience work the same way they would as if they were at work, or as close as possible. So I don't know if that answers the question in a productive way, but I've also, just so you know, I'm in South Africa, but I have a very American accent because I am an American. I'm an African American, as you can see. So I've had a circuitous route from New Haven, Connecticut at my birth, through the West Coast, the East Coast, Prague, which is near you, and spent some time in Berlin, and now I'm in South Africa for the last 18 years.
My dad's from South Africa, and it's a wonderful country. Wish it was a little bit more stable, but let's see what the future brings there. So there's a lot to cover from your background. Obviously, I'm dying to know what that dangerous situation with reality TV was, but maybe we'll save that for the next discussion. Let's probably start with your work around creativity. You said you started teaching that in the film school that you were working at. What exactly do you mean by teaching creativity in your perspective? Or what does that entail, and what does it mean for the people you're working with?
Well, I think there's so many different ways to answer that, Nick. When we started, we literally took people through The Artist's Way, Julia Cameron's book. The idea was that most film schools, really more of a TV school, don't look at creativity as a discipline as part of the training. They just teach you the elements of making film, but we wanted to make creativity an essential part of it. When I went to Nigeria to do a reality show, the creativity course that I was running got run by somebody else who did their own methodology. And so when I came back, we didn't have that book on order. So we had to start doing it ourselves. And so I started studying a number of different of the really well-known theorists on creativity, like Csikszentmihalyi, and of course Julie Cameron and Alan Heine, and just lots of the newest and sort of best comprehensive stuff about how creativity works. And I noticed that there is a pattern of how the mind works and how we, actually think about stuff. And I mean, I'm sure you're very aware that creativity is not something we learn, it's something we unlearn. And, according to the work of George Land from many years ago, 98% of children are highly creative, whereas only 2% of adults remain that way, which I think says a lot to the average person on the street. It's pretty clear, like almost everybody's born that way and almost nobody stays that way. So to me, teaching creativity is really about teaching what's in the way and getting it out of the way. And there's nothing more complex than that, although it's complex. But it's really the basic of it is how do you remove the filters and the blocks that our personalities and our identities put in the way of our ability to think flexibly and be able to adapt and be able to think in new ways all the time. Mainly, the way I've seen it is that our identity, who we see ourselves as, is the biggest sticking point, because we're only going to have the ideas that we would have. Right? We're only going to have, Nick can only have the ideas that Nick has, unless Nick knows how to change himself every day and become a different person faced with a different problem. The fact is, a different problem requires a different way of thinking. So every problem we face requires creativity and innovation. Right? Process starts with, we confront a problem, we go through the problem, we come up with possible solutions, we select some, and we implement them. That's it, right?
Absolutely.
So,
I mean, I think going back briefly to what you're talking about, the reasons why people appear to get less creative as they get older. Some of them are due to nature. So there's actual physical changes happening in the brain, but there's a lot more happening in your environment and your nurture. And the research that I do suggests that those are the things that can be changed. You mentioned identity as being one of those. So let's dive into that a little bit. What do you mean that identity is one of the reasons why people, as they get into adulthood and the later stages of their life, that it's preventing them from being creative?
Yeah, I mean, most people will fight very fiercely to be who they say they are, right? I'm not the kind of person that likes that. I'm not the kind of person that would do that. No, that those kind of people irritate me. Those kind of statements are presuming that there's some fixed identity that I have that reacts a certain way to the world. And obviously, as you know, we need to be that way a lot of the time, because we can't think about every single thing we do as if it's a new thing, or we would literally sit staring at the wall, except there wouldn't be any wall to stare at, because nobody would have taken the time to build any walls, because they would have all been staring at the air, right? So, I mean, we need that repetition of unconscious thought to guide us. But the problem is that most of us live 95% of the time in that, based on a self-construct that we have built, we forgot we built, and then we live inside of that. So if you were to look at a diagram right now, the thinking process for creativity to me is very simple. It's you perceive, you take things in, you come up with new ideas, you conceive, and then you express, you put new thoughts or actions into the world. At every step of that, we are constrained by the filters we have put on ourselves, so that we only see the things that we would see, and we miss out on things that other people see, right? So we limit our creativity at each of those steps. And we can regain the creativity at those steps by essentially removing the filters and starting to become what has been requested of us by people like Alvin Toffler many years ago, right? to become adaptable, to become flexible, to be able to move from one state to another of identity. So when I say identity,
in this case, what do you mean by a filter? Just so I've got it clear in my mind and the audience understands what you're talking about. Have you got an example of one of these filters people might put on themselves?
Sure. We all have a set of boxes in our brains theoretically, right? We immediately, as I'm speaking right now, every single person listening to this podcast is making judgments about what I'm saying. They are deciding, do they believe it or not? Does it help them or not? Does this guy know what he's talking about or not? Right? It's unstoppable. You cannot stop the machine of our minds from trying to make judgments about things. The particular set of judgments that you, Nick, or me, Michael, have, that is our personality. So there's only one Nick Skillicorn, right? There's only one Michael Lee. Nobody else has the exact same set of boxes that you have or that I have in my head. I will react to impulses, things that happen in the world around me, in a completely unique way compared to anybody else. Some of the boxes will be the same. You and I might react the same about certain things, and other things will have a totally different response, right? That collection of boxes, that collection of ways of responding to impulses is our set of filters, right? Each of those boxes poses a question, and some of the questions I ask are unique to me. You won't have those same questions. I grew up wanting people to like me. That's the way that I grew up when I was a little kid. And so I always still, as an adult, somewhere in the background, no matter how much transformational work I do or how much coaching I have or give, there's part of me that's always wondering, does this person like me, right? So that's a filter on my perception. I'm paying attention to that. We can't pay attention to everything, right? So I'm paying attention to the things that matter to me. Now, in the case of innovation, for example, that means that certain people are going to pay attention to, is this going to cost too much? Whereas someone else might be paying attention to, is this going to serve the best for people? And those limits are there because that immediately closes down the questions we're asking about the thing. And it might not be the most appropriate question for that particular project or that particular problem or situation, right? It might just not be interesting. If I say to the group, listen, I don't care what it's going to cost, let's come up with the best ideas and see it from there. But there's a person who's particularly built on, they were trained in for their whole life that money is really important. They're going to really struggle to actually even understand what I'm talking about when I say, don't put that filter on, right? So we have that filter at every step of our thought process. We don't perceive things the way a 5-year-old does, right? We have a lot more skills than a 5-year-old. But those skills come at a cost, right? So we've traded, in a way, bartered the level of skills we have and the level of knowledge we have for the clarity of vision and the clarity of expression of a child. Right? Do you have kids?
No, not yet.
Okay, well, I do, and probably a lot of people listening do, and I'm sure that you know that a 5-year-old kid does not perceive the world with a lot of blinders on. They see what's there, What they don't have is the skills to manage it the way we do. Right? But so when I talk about filters, what I'm talking about is that we all, as adults, have built a certain set of the way the world occurs for us. And as useful as that can be, it's also a prison, right? It's a prison because we only see the world that way. And the more we work on becoming flexible and adaptable, the more we can listen or hear the 7 billion other opinions about reality that exist, And it's interesting that most people, myself included for most of my life, will stand by our own perception and our own opinion in the face of there are 7 billion contrasting opinions in the world, but mine is the right one, right? And we're taught that is actually the right way to live, that we should be proud of who we are and we should be, we should find ourselves. Absolutely. Which is great. The challenge is that, when we get stuck on that, we become addicted to it, really. It's almost like a drug.
The brain feeds on biases, and it's actually evolved to do that. So the more experience you gain in life. Yes, that can be a valuable starting point for a lot of creativity and innovation, but it's also a hindrance in some ways, that it starts narrowing down how you perceive the world, what you actually end up seeing, how you react to it, and how you end up incorporating that into what you want to do going forward.
100%, exactly.
So you mentioned filters at the beginning. We've talked about filters affecting an individual's creativity a little bit. But what I think a lot of professionals listening to this podcast might be interested in is how these filters affect how innovation happens, both at an individual level and maybe at a company level. So what's your view on what's keeping companies from performing at their highest capability when it comes to innovation?
Right. So, I mean, we all hear these surveys all the time, right, about how badly companies are doing at innovation. I think the newest, very comprehensive one was McKinsey looking at 2020. They said, I think it was 84% of C-suite executives say that innovation is critical for their company, and only 6% say it's working. So there's two things there, Nick. One is that why people expect innovation to succeed all of the time is a big problem, right? Innovate, we all know the story of, whether it's true or not, Thomas Edison's 10,000 efforts to make a light bulb, and his famous quote that he didn't fail once, he actually succeeded 10,000 times in discovering the wrong way to make a light bulb. So, I mean, I think there's a lack in a lot of organizations of the willingness to actually fail, because failing is a part of innovation, creativity. If you're writing a book, or making a song, you fail again and again and again. You rewrite. I mean, 80% of everything I write is bleep, said Ernest Hemingway, right? So, as a practicing creative myself, I know very clearly that, most of what we generate sucks. And that's okay. It's part of the process. But in companies, it's a lot harder to cope with failure, right? Most companies want to see a result, and 5%, I think it is, of product innovations succeed, 95% fail. So the first part is, okay, let's deal with the fact that there's a lot more success happening than they say. But are the companies willing to actually ride through the process necessary of an individual innovator who is determined to get to the end of the process no matter what? The second thing is that I think a lot of companies overlook how much innovation is constantly actually happening. If you look at innovation as creating a solution to a problem and causing a result that improves the problem, every single meeting has innovation going on. Every single
I disagree with every meeting. I've been in my fair share of meetings that
okay, fair enough.
But I see what you're talking about. There's little steps being taken every day, and there's incremental work happening all the time.
Yeah, there's incremental innovation happening constantly. If I have a team, if I have a team in a company and the team's not performing to its utmost, and I'm looking for ways to shift the way that team is performing, I'm innovating the team. And so I think there's a huge amount of, when I say 6% say that it's working, are they overlooking, number one, the fact that it's not supposed to work every single time, not even close? And number two, are they realizing that every single thing their company is doing involves innovation? That unless they're actively trying to maintain the status quo, unless they're actively trying, human beings, we innovate as a matter of instinct. It's what we do. It's the thing that is most unique about humans, probably, is our ability to judge and our ability to innovate, which is like a tug of war, right? But I mean, you can't stop people from innovating. They're always going to look for a better way to do something, save time, save money, do something better than they did before.
I mean, I'm not sure I 100% agree with you. I think in most people, if you really gave them the freedom to do what they want and what they thought was best, yes, I think in many cases they would want to innovate there. But if you say you can't stop them innovating, there's more than enough examples that I'm sure you've seen, that I've seen, that people around the world have seen, of organizations and structures that really prevent progress happening. So there's a desire, but there's a lack of ability to proceed.
Right. Well, notice what I said is you can't stop humans from innovating. Only way you can stop them is to pay them not to. Right, which is what you're talking about. I mean, companies that don't know how to do it. The other problem, Nick, that I think is the most important innovation any human being can ever make is to innovate themselves, right? Like we talked about already. So you walk into a company and you say, let's improve your innovation program. But they don't want to start with actually dealing with the people in the team. They want to just put in a system or, a culture that's going to suddenly solve the problem. I mean, first of all, we know that changing culture is one of the hardest things there is to do, even if the leadership completely believes in it or whatever. It's just hard to do. The bigger the company, the harder it is. But even if you do that, what good does it do if the individuals haven't learned to let go of the blocks that they've put in their whole life against, the creativity they had available? So it has to start with the individuals. So the culture has to, number one, promote the idea of innovation and creativity as important, which it seems to people like you and me is kind of obvious, but it doesn't seem like it's that obvious to most companies yet. They want to do it, but they don't want to actually commit to it. They don't want to commit to the failure aspect. They don't want to commit to actually training people to release the blocks that they've been, building up their whole life. It's kind of like, hey, you walked into this job with those blocks on your thinking, like, it's not our fault, you sorted it out, right? But then they want to have an innovative culture or an innovative company. You have to start with the individuals. You have to start there. And now you can put in, policies, systems, structures that encourage that, or even demand it. You can demand that people take a day each week to just think about stuff, or give them a training program to help them think more flexibly. You can do all that stuff. But if you don't do that stuff, it's my contention that no matter what system you put in place, you're never going to really accelerate innovation. Right? And that's why companies that are the super innovative companies all have that culture, and they've always had it. Companies we all admire and read case studies about, Gore-Tex and Apple and Google, and the companies where they have built in some kind of very special way of giving employees the space to play, to fail, to even learn, to actually unlearn the block. So to me, it's like the crazy, terrible, painful thing. You take a team of 20 people, you put them in a room, it's like a bunch of robots bouncing off of each other, right? They're all programmed by themselves over the course of their life to behave a certain way. Now you just wind them up and let them go. How is that going to work? You need to actually, first of all, train them individually how to release the blocks that they've put in the way. And then secondly, actually work on the team together. How do you get them to cohere and work together, right? That's the only way to overcome the systemic problem that we've built up in our society up to this point.
Well, to build on what you just said, I think you mentioned the individuals in the team working there, then there's the team working itself. But what we also need to make sure is that the companies and the leadership within these companies that's trying to encourage their individuals to innovate. The leadership is also made of individuals. And quite often those are the ones that find it most challenging to change not only themselves, but the systems in which they operate. I wrote an article today about a bias called the ostrich effect. And this is where individuals, especially higher up individuals, just don't want to hear bad news. So what they do is they do what the mythical ostrich does, and they just stick their head in the sand. And if they can't see the danger and can't see the bad news, then obviously it doesn't exist. And that's a very extreme example of what happens with people often at the higher executive levels in companies that don't have this culture where innovation can flourish. But if it is a culture like that, then these individuals telling their employees, look, you've got all the freedom you want to innovate, go and do something, but I'm not going to change. And if you come to me with what I perceive as a bad idea or an innovation project you've started that has failed, then I'm still going to treat you how I previously did. I think everyone in the organization needs to see what capabilities they need, and they need to communicate and they need to exude for it to succeed in the company.
Yeah, amen. It has to come from the leadership ultimately. It has to. And I think the most damaging word, if it's a word, for innovation in the corporate environment is ROI. Right? Like when you look at ROI, I mean, there's just no way to measure it, you know, and people want, some companies, that's what they want to measure. The fact is a great innovation in a company can generate ROI that's immeasurable, right? At the same time, these tiny incremental innovations, if it's conducted as an ongoing policy or a way of thinking, can generate tremendous ROI that's hidden, that you don't even see that it's coming from innovation per se, right? So, I mean, yeah, couldn't agree more. Like the leadership has to be not just on board, they have to understand how it works, right? Absolutely. And the fact is, most C-suite people don't understand how creativity and innovation work. But here's one more thing for you, Nick. My approach to this is that creativity and innovation are precisely the same thing. The only difference is creativity is thinking and innovation is acting, right? It is one giant meta program. It all involves the same type of thought. Consider innovation is like landing the plane ultimately, right? You have to cause the result to happen. Now there's a plethora of problems there because every company has a different resistance system, right? Every situation in society has a different resistance system, things that are going to make it hard for you to deal with. There's blind luck, you know, there's like, does this land at the right time, or were you 10 years too soon? Like, you know, some companies we don't even hear about because we forgot about them because, you know, Yahoo is still around, but Google kind of came a few years later and did it better, and people kind of forgot about Yahoo. It's kind of there, but you know, we don't say, I'm going to go Yahoo something today, right? And there's countless examples of just the timing was off. Great idea, timing was off. So there's so many limitations that we deal with innovation in terms of implementation. But each of the cycles of dealing with the implementation goes back to be creative again. We have to think about how do we solve that? We have to think about how do we solve that? There's literally, in my position, no difference between creativity and innovation, except that one is thought, one is action, right? And that, I think, is where another place where companies don't get it. They tend to forsake the idea that creative thinking is important, or they think it's somehow a function of a person that they're going to hire, that person is a very creative person. In fact, that person might just be creative in one way. And when they're faced with landing the plane, they're not that good at it because they don't understand all the factors and they don't know how to rethink and reiterate, right?
Absolutely.
So that's the really critical thing for companies to think of it. All the stuff we've discussed is how do you actually open the door to actually letting people grow and trust? You know that old saying about like one executive says to the other, you know, what happens if we pay to train all these people and then they leave? And then the other executive says, I'm a lot more worried what happens if we don't pay to train them and they stay. You know that old saying?
Absolutely, yeah.
It's you know, that's the conundrum that we face. Either take a risk or don't. If you're
Michael,
not going to take a risk, then don't expect to innovate.
Exactly. Michael, I've really enjoyed our discussion today. If people want to find out more about the work that you do or any of the other insights that you have, what's the best place they can go to find out more?
Well, okay, I'll give you two places, right? For Innovation Minds, which is really, we didn't really talk about much, but there's a lot of interesting stuff there. Just go to innovationminds.com. And there's a complete explanation of what the company does. For my work around creativity, innovation training and coach training, you can go to the innotivityinstitute.com. Innotivity is INNOTIVITY institute.com. We never even got into discussing innotivity, but it's kind of summed up when I said creativity and innovation are just one process, just one process. Absolutely. I think you've whetted people's appetites, and I recommend you go down to both of those links. I'll have them down in the description below, and you can find out more about Innotivity and Innovation Minds. Michael, it's been wonderful having you here today, and I look forward to speaking again with you soon. Thank you, Nick. It's really, really a pleasure to be on the show. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. If you liked it, please like, share and subscribe, and leave me a comment about what you thought and what you'd like to see more about. If you want to take your creativity and innovation capabilities to the next level, then invest in yourself with the premium training only available at ideatovalue.com. These exclusive training modules have all been put together by me, Nick Skillicorn, and have been used by thousands of artists, innovation leaders and CEOs to become better at understanding the source of their creativity and executing on their innovation ambitions. And there is no risk to you, as they're backed by our money-back guarantee. Now, don't forget to go out there and make your ideas a reality. See you again soon.